So we have a doctor, a sociologist breaking down the science as to the divisions of the African race inside of Africa for European involvement in the people of Africa. In that chapter, he talks about the Songhai people. He talks about different hunters and fishermen, different lifestyles. And then he moves on, of course, chapter 5 into Egypt. And he talks about civilization has flowed down to man along the Nile Valley, great rivers, where the soil was fertile, and that man need not fear hunger, and where waters carried him to other peoples who were thinking of problems of human life. So he talks about how the Nile River flowed 4,100 miles. He don't go as deep as Dr. Ben, however, he touches on the fact that civilization, the cradle civilization was and began in the Nile River Valley. And he talks about the different dynasties. Of course, he doesn't go deep as far as naming names and things like that, because this is an overview, ladies and gentlemen. This is an overview of the different groups of people in that area. Then he talks about how the Greeks called the Egyptian the most religious of men. It's interesting. That's and then he talks about the gift of the unusual climate, the dry atmosphere with this baking sun, the chance to preserve what man delineated and carved and built. So Egypt perfected what they learned from Ethiopia and Nubia. And he goes into some of the dynasties, especially the famous 25th dynasty, where Egypt expanded a little bit. Now, he talked about King Pepi and Uni, and of course he mentions Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt, some terms that those who study ancient Egyptian history, we're gonna get to it. He mentions the Sphinx and the lion's body and the Negro head entirely carved out of rock, and of course the Sphinx is 10,500 years old, but he doesn't deal with that. We have to understand that some of these authors didn't have this knowledge that we have, but it's a good foundation, ladies and gentlemen. Good foundation. Then he goes into the land of the birth faces, which is, of course, Ethiopia. Chapter 6, Ethiopia, the land of the birth faces. And he uses the table of nations, Genesis 10, and he talks about how the Greeks described them as people with burnt faces. And so we have to understand that even on record, according to the Greeks, Memnon was the king of Ethiopia. Andromeda was black. So he's using this opportunity, not just to talk about Ethiopia, but he's using this opportunity to talk about how the people describe the Ethiopians. And he mentioned major cities, the temple built at Thebes, which was an Ethiopian colony. That had relief representing four quarters now lit the world, Deduan, and many other deities. This is page 137. The Assyrians defeated the forces of Egypt and drove them back. The Ethiopians drove back the Ethiopians until 688 BC, and they came back. So then he moves on. He covers the whole continent. And he talked about the people in North Africa. And then later on, he goes back to Central Africa in the March of the Bantu. So he's not done building on the Bantu people or the Bantu people. So we have to understand that Dr. DuBois is doing the work that we should be doing. Well, he has done the work. He has laid the foundation that we should be doing. And it says the evident amount of gold extracted from prehistoric Rhodesia or Zimbabwe is indicated in the Hebrew scriptures, page 173, by ancient stories before the commencement of the Christian era. So the people of the world already knew Africa had gold. So they already knew that this place had wealth. Before the Europeans discovered diamonds in Zulu land in the 1700s, centuries before that, East Africa traveled to Asia, and with their goods and their gold, and they even mined and minted their own money with their own image. Ancient Italian coins of the 3rd and 2nd century had black faces on them. So of course, we know that several East Africans had been enrolled for the army and the ruler of Baghdad, and so he goes on and builds. He goes to various parts of Africa. Then he touches on various parts of the world. And DuBois gave an unknown Jew. He talked about Andromeda. He talks about the nations of Africa as a unified nation. Okay? Talk about him as, what you will, how you feel about him. But we know that some bigotry has put blinders on the so-called scholars by trying to downplay our worth as a people, even ethnicities, by bringing back and releasing concepts that the original people said that the Africans were black, but then later on, because of racism in the modern era, they made them black. Pan-Africanism is the final point that DuBois was trying to make. Unity. He wanted for the United States African Americans, as well as in the diaspora, to realize the need to unite with the cause of Africans on the continent. He did give his opinion of the movement of Garvey, as well as his own. The masses of the West Indies were listening to Garvey, but intellectuals were all in Paris, both promoting Africa as a people, as human beings. Du Bois said Pan-Africa socialism seeks the welfare state in Black Africa. In another segment, he proclaims, in the light of maintaining historical data, Pan-Africa will seek to preserve its own past history and write the present account, erasing from literature the lies and distortions about Black folk, which disgrace the last centuries of European and American literature. We need to pay attention. We need to have our own philosophy and our own political agenda. So we have to build our own and do for ourselves.